Good afternoon, JP Garu.
Good afternoon, Jayaprakash Garu.
Now, let's take the budget also. Almost all the state governments in India, across the board, I'm not saying Telangana or AP, most of the tax revenue goes towards paying employee salaries. The rest comes from central government's contribution for taxes, the share of the state taxes in the central revenue or the tax revenue, and debt. So even in the central government, I was looking at the numbers, almost 25 to 30% is going in taxation, in salaries for government employees. And then Modi wants to add 10 lakh more employees, central government employees. How is this good for the economy?
Why the recent
Why are we paying these kind of salaries? I'll just give you a few examples, because I live now in rural India, rural areas. In electricity department linemen, the required qualification is 7th class pass. Is making 1.5 lakh rupees salary.
I thought 50,000.
No, it is not. More than 1 lakh. Some of the senior fellows are now hitting close to 2 lakhs. Now, a government school teacher in my village gets paid more than the best international school in Hyderabad. In the village, right? Anywhere more than 1 lakh, some of them are 1.5 lakh. If you're a headmaster, now it is nearing 2 lakhs. The Food Corporation of India loaders, I don't know if you're aware of this, some of them, the top 300, 400 is 4 to 5 lakh rupees a month. Basta almost, the guy who carries the bags in Food Corporation of India, 4 lakhs, and thousands of them get at least 1 lakh rupee a month. And Food Corporation of India or food subsidy is the largest welfare scheme in the central government today. This is where all the tax money is going. So if I go by your numbers, right, 30% are the people probably who are paying the taxes, right? And there are a lot of people who are not even in the tax net. So I guess people who pay are actually paying 40, 50% of their income in taxes. And this is how the money, I feel, the hard-earned money of the people is going waste. Where did this government or the previous governments, where have they tried to fix this?
I am entirely in agreement with you. What happened over the years is because of socialist mumbo jumbo. The notion that employment in government is a virtuous thing and government must be a model employer unrelated to productivity. We enhance the wages in government by a factor of 5. If you take not at the top management level but at the service delivery level, if X is the wage for a comparable job in the private sector, typically in government 3 to 5x is the wage. Now 20% additional wage as an incentive in public services is okay. But 3 times to 5 times, the system simply cannot sustain. On top of it, the service is not there. It now become an entitlement. In fact, in schools alone, for instance, the contractual employees, when they were there in schools, the para teachers, etc., who were paid a nominal amount, oftentimes the criticism is that they were working harder and are available. Whereas the person who is getting 1 lakh rupees or 70,000 rupees salary is not available, is not working. Or you have somebody as a proxy, at a nominal wage you put him there and he works on your behalf. So this kind of distortion has happened continually.
Right. So,
and it's a tragedy that the states and the union now talk about employment in government as the source of employment, and they reinforce in the image that employment means in government and employment means get a monthly wage because you have got a degree or something. Employment means you don't have to deliver anything, and in some cases employment means it's an opportunity to make extra money illegally.
Right.
I completely agree with you, and I think one day we have to confront this honestly,
right,
and make the government actually deliver.
Right. So my question to you is, you focus more on taxation, how taxation is necessary. Not only you, even the systems, even the politicians, even those that are ruling the states and at the center are not focusing on controlling the waste, cutting down the size of the government.
I totally agree. In fact, you mentioned some numbers. Government of India numbers, if you look at it, it should disturb any one of us. Take this year, the tax revenues of Government of India that were projected in the budget are 22 lakh crores, 22 trillion rupees. Of that, 16.11 trillion rupees goes to states, various forms of transfers, either finance commission devolution, or the so-called centrally sponsored schemes and other programs and grants in aid. 16.11 trillion out of 22. 9.43 trillion is interest payments of Government of India.
Exactly.
Together, the tax revenue is not enough. There's not a rupee. We talked about even salaries.
Right.
Establishment cost is 6 lakh crore rupees, 6 trillion. If you add that, and then pensions over a period of time, what happened is they've gone for index-linked pensions. So your salary draw may have been 10,000, but your pension could be 1 lakh rupees
Right, exactly.
after some time.
Right.
And it's also intergenerational problem.
Right.
Today's generation is forced to pay for the services alleged to have been rendered 30 years ago. Our children are going to be forced to pay
Right.
for the services rendered to us, if at all they are rendered.
Right.
That's why Vajpayee government came up with an extremely wise solution. It's the Vajpayee government that actually created the foundations for fiscal stability in India. Very, very mature government, even when they had no majority. FRBM Act was during Vajpayee government, 2003.
And states are hating it right now.
But all states at the time adopted, though
Right.
across the country, there was a political consensus, some wisdom
Right.
prevailing.
Right.
Second,
That's one good thing.
the
It's
new
a
pension,
fantastic-
the new pension approach, not the old pension, indexed pension, but the contribution has to be made by the employee and the employer today. So the costs are transparent and it's put away, and you derive from that money. There is no pension liability on the future. Next generation will not be able to pay. But already some states, for instance, Rajasthan went back on that very foolishly. Chhattisgarh is going back on that. State after state, after this consensus and they've done some good things, they're going back on that. Armed forces, the main reason why Agnipath had to be introduced was this pension liability because of one rank, one pension program. All parties publicly talked about it. This government, this party also talked about it, the party in power today. They implemented it. Finally, they realized most of the money is going for salaries and pensions, not for modernization of armed forces and weaponry and training.
Right.
So there are definitely serious distortions, and the kind of effort Vajpayee government made, we need that redoubled effort across the spectrum in the country.
Right, right. I mean, we had two great examples, right? 91, PV Narasimha Rao at the helm and completely changing the philosophy of how the economy should be governed, and then Vajpayee. But then the rest of the time, I feel we are going in a wrong direction altogether. But you said, we're going in the right
I
direction.
am a little more optimistic because democracy is on vicissitudes. Ultimately, you also have to carry the people.
Right. So we can agree to disagree. I accept that. Now the question is, I felt when this NDA government came to power, it was our one chance to start competing with China, to grow the economy at a pace that we could at least catch up. Now we are almost 1/6 of where they are, which is a tragedy if you ask me. Now this is the government that can bring about reform in public sector without having to worry about some of the unions. At least the right wing also has unions, but the left wing is more driven and supported by the unions. Why did it take Modi so many years to even privatize Air India? And now that he privatized Air India, which is a good thing, but it still seems to struggle to get to them. He bailed out BSNL, 1 lakh crores. He bailed out banks, 2 lakh crores.
1,64,000 crores. Actually, the recent announcement of 1.64 lakh crores to the government communications companies is by any standard extremely unwise and completely counter to the other things that the government is attempting, because they are beginning to talk about privatization, etc. The Prime Minister is talking about government not doing business very aggressively and very, very clearly. But actions are betraying those sentiments.
You tell me, if it's good politics, how is raising taxes on petrol 12 times and penalize the entire nation better than liquidating BSNL and bailing out with 1.6 lakh crores? How is that good politics? I don't understand.
BSNL,
Can you read?
I
Not
think,
only BSNL, I mean even public sector banks, right? They have lost 7.5 lakh crores in the last. They have written off, not lost. Losses are higher.
in fact, the government has added in the form of capital adequacy about 4 lakh crores in the last 5 years alone. Every year, about 70 to 80,000 crores is being pumped into public sector banks.
Exactly.
Therefore, you're absolutely right. The next generation reform primarily should be not merely other public sector utilities, but banks. Not only that, one bank, HDFC, one private bank, smaller than of course SBI, but many other public sector banks, its market cap is larger than all the public sector banks put together. That means market is saying we trust this bank, not all those banks, despite massive deposit bases and so on and so forth. And two, the political interference in lending. Once you are the owner, after all, your local MP or some other person, they call the shots. Therefore, lending has to be to cronies. And therefore, inefficient allocation of resources. And therefore, defaults, non-performing assets. And banks are getting deeper and deeper into the problem. Right. And then you're asking for more and more tax money in a desperately poor country where rule of law, education, healthcare, they're all in shambles.
Right.
So banks must be privatized, and this bogus talk that government owning banks is for the benefit of the people, that must be honestly and systematically be addressed by all of us, not merely the government and the political parties.
And the thing is, we have private banks right next to public sector banks, and we can compare, right, how they're doing. And private banks are not in this bad state.
I was at a function of the retired public sector bank officials. They said openly when I asked them that their children don't want to deposit in the public sector banks where they work. They're going to HDFC Bank or ICICI Bank.
Right.
Their
service is terrible.
So I said, look, your children are walking with their feet. They're voting with their feet. So you're talking that public sector banks are important is irrelevant.
No, but then why is NDA struggling? Why is Modi struggling? Why is not... See, if this government cannot do it, no government can do it.
I agree with you, and I hope that they will do it.
That's all I know. It's not a question that you could answer, but I'm just...
But not surprisingly, though sadly from our perspective, and this is happening all over the world, unfortunately, in democratic world, very often politicians feel tempted to put their short-term political interests above the nation's long-term economic interests. I think that is clearly seen. Therefore, my approach is, shall we shore up their sense of what is right and wrong? Shall we give them confidence? Shall we talk very logically and consistently about the rational steps that are required? Because abusing each other does not help at all. Because the alternative does not seem to be particularly advantageous at this point of time. Because they're not even talking of economic growth.
I agree. That's what I said. So the first time I voted for Modi, second time I couldn't vote for anybody. Now the third time it's coming again, I couldn't get myself to vote for a UPA candidate.
You're absolutely right. And I'm particularly sad because healthcare, for instance, COVID is a fantastic opportunity. There's a great opportunity, and we should have really utilized the opportunity to build a viable healthcare system at a relatively low cost. And India is very lucky to be able to do that. But there's no imagination. Mm-hmm. Rule of law is in shambles. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows the problems. Irrespective of the cost, we have to fix it. Mm-hmm. I don't see any movement at all there. Unquestionably, there are challenges.
So slightly switching the gears. So this is a, supposedly a right-leaning government or right-wing government. More pro-market tendencies. Worldwide, when you see a right-wing government, they are more pro-market than the other side. There is, some encouragement to private sector, but how do you react to set business groups being favored, completely off the charts, right? Everybody says A&A, Ambani and Adani are the two names that keep coming up, right? Whether it's in the case of Jio, documented favoritism. Even in the case of Adani, the airports, the India government itself has put that no one entity can run more than 3 or 5 airports. I don't remember the number. And right then it was violated to help one person. There's a lot of talk about, coal coming from Australia. The government placed a regulation that 10% of imported coal should be used. And then the contract goes to, Adani coming from to import coal from Australia. Now there is a talk that, Chinese phones are going to be banned at a certain price point. And then the next day the news comes, Reliance is getting into this 30,000 rupee and below phone. How do you explain? Why would they go so one-sided in helping certain businesses?
How many of these are conjectures and rumors, how many are truth, I cannot verify. But undoubtedly, there is a widespread feeling that certain industrial groups are being favored, that competition is being eroded. And the companies are oftentimes arm-twisted to hand over the keys to favored groups. And I think there is some reasonable evidence to support some of these contentions. What the government must realize is that apart from the morality, it's obviously immoral and wrong. There's no question about it. Apart from the morality of it, it can never be secret. it undermines your credibility. And two, investing community, global investing community, they examine these things with a fine-tooth comb. So whatever your pronouncements in public, if they feel that there is no fair competition and you will not be treated fairly and the government will support or side with their favored industrial groups, then investment will dry up. And this is a critical time when China, for whatever reason, is losing steam and the rest of the world is very worried about a belligerent China, a very nationalistic, belligerent and expansive China. And in any case, supply chain disruption after the COVID, people now don't want to put all the eggs in one basket.
True.
India has very conducive conditions. But it appears that India thinks that we are entitled to growth automatically and global investments, irrespective of what we do in the country. I think in real life, it doesn't work like that. While conditions are conducive, the rest of the world wants us to succeed, we have to also prove that investments here are safe and fair and there is a level playing field. And if that impression, for whatever reason, is eroded across the world, we lose big time. So I think the short-term advantages they see by some amount of favoritism versus the long-term damage to the country and therefore undermining their own political viability and economic future, I think they're not able to see that. They are compartmentalizing it.
So,
but there is a link. I have no doubt about it.
Agreed.
So they can argue that earlier also there was cronyism, excess duties were all altered, but that's why India failed.
That's why India failed, right? So
we cannot use that argument
exactly.
now.
Till 90s, we were a protected economy. We could not import freely. We could not export freely. Maybe there was a little bit of exports allowed freely, but you couldn't export if there was no free market as such. And we have learned that protectionist regimes do not work because economically it was a failed economy.
There's no doubt about it. That's why we were also happy when the farm sector liberalization was announced. But perhaps either the style, maybe Narasimha Rao's style, even as you're taking a 180-degree U-turn, you pretend as if it's a continuation of Nehru-Indira Gandhi policies.
Right.
Even if it's dishonest in terms of articulation, maybe there's a wiser strategy, a less offensive way of communicating. Maybe there should have been deeper communication. But certainly, the government made earnest attempts. And I think the media and the political elites of the country, they failed the country. For short-term political gains, a message was spread totally insincerely and dishonestly that the farm laws were anti-farmer. I am a great friend of the farmers. The people of Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Karnataka, they all know in how many cases many of us intervened to the benefit of the farmers, including removing the trade barriers internally, removing the illegitimate export bans on rice, for instance, or insistence on, with success, imposing some kind of import duty to reduce the burden on the oilseed farmers in India. So many things. I am absolutely supportive of the farm laws. One of the most tragic things in India is not only have the government had to go back on the farm laws, but a narrative was spread that they were anti-farmer. Right. There was nothing more. That's one of the biggest lies in independent India.
I agree.
And it's a tragic and shameful lie.
Right. That was a very good bill that they brought.
And the media too completely failed. Everybody viewed it from the political prism rather than the farmers' interests and the economic prism of the country. It's a very tragic occurrence.
Yeah, it is quite
and I'm sure
sad
that further dampens the government's order for economic reform and liberalization. That's the tragedy. If politics and economics are not in sync, ultimately it's economic growth and the poverty eradication that suffer. And the people who pay the biggest price are not the rich, it's the poor.
So the economic growth that we have seen post-liberalization in 90s has led many people to believe these closed economies do not help, right? So imposing severe restrictions on imports, on trade in general is not a good thing. And it continued under Vajpayee.
SocialPost.news ని సబ్స్క్రైబ్ చేయండి.
Please subscribe to SocialPost.news.
Please subscribe to SocialPost.news.
Please download SocialPost app.
Please download SocialPost app.